Welcome to the future of fertility and menopause. I'm Bambi Francisco Roizen, and I'm joined by Dr. Archana Dubey, my co-host of Invent Health, which produces these events and webinars. Today's topic is women's health. There is a fertility problem in the world. About 1 in 6 adults are struggling with infertility, according to the World Health Organization. In fact, the WHO says that infertility is a disease. Of course, that is one way to look at an ability that just has a natural time limit. Infertility, in fact, and ironically, seems to be the price paid for freedom. Freedom to pursue careers or an unencumbered lifestyle until well into our 30s and 40s, when unfortunately, fertility goes over what many know as the fertility cliff. Of course, genetics or toxins we consume or breathe play a role as well. And then there's technologies that have been liberating and life-saving, but they've also come with downside risk when it comes to our reproductive system, such as early onset of menopause.
Yeah, and let's kind of dwell into our subject matter experts are right here with us, and so let's kind of take a deep dive in this conversation around what is really happening, and from the journey, from woman's journey from fertility to menopause, and maybe we can even include puberty to fertility to menopause, and what are the new technological advancements that are happening, so we can bring awareness around our listeners, but then also talk about like how they're helping women, or maybe not having some pitfalls that we need to be aware about. And then how is that being paid for or being covered by as an employee benefit or as a part of a health plan benefit? So looking into that, and then also how our clinicians are becoming knowledgeable and adopting the newer interventions or innovations inside of women's health. And then also getting to know about new topics that have become a keen interest of our constituents, patients, providers, and purchasers, how they are looking at menopause differently, and also including women in early on in, for example, drug trials and others, to look at women differently as a human rather than just men with extra body parts. So again, welcome to this conversation, and let's start our discussion with introductions. We have a really distinguished panel of speakers who would take a deep dive inside of this. And I would like to start with, in no particular order, but like to start with Dr. Tendai Shiwari, if I pronounced the name correctly, to introduce yourself. And I would love to hear a women's health hack that either as a clinician that you have taken on and learned, or as a woman that you use in your life.
Great. Thank you so much. As you say, I'm Tendai Chiware, and I am a reproductive endocrinologist and infertility specialist, also board certified in obstetrics and gynecology and minimally invasive GYN surgery. I am in Brooklyn, New York. That's where my practice is at the moment.
Welcome, Dr. Tendai.
Thank you.
And what is your women's health hack?
So my women's health hack is actually using apps to track my cycles.
Oh,
yes.
That's amazing.
It's very reliable because it actually tells you on average how long your cycles are and when to expect your next period. So I love that.
That's amazing. I'm a primary care provider, and this is one question women could not answer consistently. When was your last cycle? They knew when was the last their children's last recital, their last exam, and everything else except for their own cycle. So this is great. Apps are good. Passing on to Dr. Jean Gekes, who's a founder, CEO of Genoscience. Jean, can you introduce yourself and then share a women's health hack for us?
Of course, I grew up in Paris. I am a physician and a medical geneticist, and very early during my academic background, I fell in love with couples, with pregnant women, with women seeking to get pregnant. So I think it's a wonderful clientele. And so since then, I get all my degrees around this reproduction medicine, and to get the better quality service for that. In 2003, I came in Quebec City, where we opened a new modern child center here, and I was in charge to create the prenatal unit and all the screening unit based on genetics. And during the years I practice medicine in Quebec City, I see that there is no one place with all the services needed around couples seeking to get pregnant for the woman, and to have a follow-up for the pregnancy in one point service, with all the qualified professionals in the same place. So we decided to create that in 2016 with Genoscience, and our two brands, the more common brands, prenatal clinics for the pregnancy follow-up, and fertility, take care, and also Genolife for the genetic screening of all the family and hereditary pathologies of the family.
Thank you for that. And what's your women's health hack? What have you suggested your patients to do, or something that has always helped patients?
Oh, I think to listen themselves first, to see exactly what they want at the time they want, to get the good information, and to make an informed choice, and based on their values and the couple's values. I think this is something very important that we very often forget.
Thank you for that, Jane. Passing on to Dr. Jillian Lopiano. If you don't mind introducing yourself, and then also sharing your women's health hack.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jillian Lopiano. I am a board-certified OBGYN. I have been working mostly as a hospitalist in various places throughout the U.S. Since I graduated from residency. I am a military spouse, and so we've bounced around quite a bit. So I've had the pleasure of working in DC, New England, Texas, and now we're on to Florida. So been working mostly as a hospitalist. I got into telemedicine a couple of years ago, and through a medical school friend and colleague, and just took over as the chief health officer for WISP, which is a women's health online telemedicine company. And so that's been super exciting new venture for me. I started on just about 3 weeks ago.
Congratulations on that, Jillian.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's quite exciting. We've heard good things about the solution. What is your women's health hack?
I think my women's health hack is actually kind of, now I've just started this, but it's becoming one of encouraging women to take advantage of this online and telehealth space, and pointing them towards the educational materials that can be found in these, in these spaces. And it's really important to me because I think it's so important to teach women to find the right resources. There's so much information out there and not all of it is good. And so my the apps has been one for a little while as well. So I agree with that, and I love that that's across the board. But I think that finding ways to direct women to the good online resources that are available for access is kind of my new one.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to pass the baton on to Dr. Tammy Mahoney, who is next on my tile. So that's what I was saying, like no particular order. Tammy, would you kindly introduce yourself? I know you're traveling, so not on camera. and then also share your women's health hack.
Yeah, so can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So I absolutely agree with everyone about the apps, but before I get into the life hacks, so I'm a doctor of nurse practice and family nurse practitioner, and I did start off my career as an Army captain. So did nursing for over 20 years in all different variety of settings, and then I'm very passionate about health and healing for all people, and I do a lot of global health missions with medical missions outreach. So I've been to over 50 countries, 6 continents, except for Antarctica, and I really don't have a desire to go there. But I just really care a lot about women, especially because I see different women from all over the world and see a lot of health issues. So currently in the Bay Area, I have a primary care clinic in San Francisco called Bella Primary Care, and then 2 women's health clinics, one in Oakland and one in Union City, where I offer free prenatal care up to 24 weeks in underserved communities. And so that's what I'm currently doing. And personally, I have 6 children of my own. So a lot of personal experience with fertility and infertility. And then my newly married, so my husband has 4. So together we have 10 children, and balancing schedules is always fun. As far as my life hack, I would say that I'm really passionate about educating women on their fertility window and ovulation for either preventing pregnancy or obtaining pregnancy. And then for mood swings and just in general PMS or uplifting each other, I really encourage tapping into our natural hormones, those happy hormones, serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphins, just through, whether it's taking a hike or meditation or visiting a friend or petting a dog, all of those types of things just to help improve mental health and physical health as well. Oh, and Bambi wanted me to mention also that I'm a venture capitalist with Suncoast Ventures. So that is something I'm very passionate about, is finding different companies and organizations and CEOs and founders that are creating meaningful impact, especially in the women's health space.
That's fantastic, Tammy. How many Tammys are there? Because I don't know. How are you managing the power role of a mother and then multiplying it into 3 different other roles? So kudos. Keep just make sure you take care of yourself too.
Yes, self-care is important.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm passing it on to Lakeisha. So talking about venture capital, Lakeisha is out there. Lakeisha, would you mind introducing yourself as you come from the venture world? Welcome.
Thank you, Archana, and thank you, Bambi, for hosting us today. What an incredible group. I wish I went first. But before I go, I do want to quickly say, Tammy, I would love to have 10 children. I only have 3. And if I could get my husband to see how you all manage, I can maybe talk him into the idea that this is possible. It's possible to run a venture capital firm and have a
We can chat offline.
Yes, that sounds great. And so I am one of 3 founders of Emmeline Ventures. So Emmeline Ventures is an early stage venture capital firm. We're a women-led venture capital firm focused at the early stage for in women's health. So half of our fund invests in women's health. We know the Suncoast Ventures team quite well, and really what we invest in women's health, but also with a multi-tiered thesis. So we invest in women's health, wealth, and what we call sort of a cleaner, safer world. And so part of the reason that we invest across these 3 verticals is when we think of women's health, we think investing in healthcare, but we also have a very clear understanding that at the intersection and the importance of investing in women's wealth, right? Because women's health is very much impacted by her socioeconomic position. And so we're investing across health, wealth, and sort of safer world. That's already been alluded to earlier in the conversation, how important our environment is, and how
Yes.
environmental toxins impact our health, our fertility, puberty, which I really love that came up today, because we often think about sort of later stage impact when now young girls are starting puberty, as early as 5. And so anyway, so there's all of that is very much interconnected for us, and it's why we have that sort of that threaded thesis. And I put a note here. Oh, and my women's health hack, I have 2. So my I said a postpartum women's health hack before I even heard your story, Tammy. So you may have a better postpartum women's health hack, but for me it was a pelvic floor therapist and a postpartum doula, right? And so I think it's for
Yeah, that's good.
when you think about women's health, particularly postpartum,
Yeah.
really to sort of go back into the market and do the very important work. I'm actually releasing a letter to mothers. I think it's so important for mothers to stay in the workplace afterwards. So postpartum women's health is incredibly important so that these women can stay in the workplace. So for me, that's a pelvic floor therapist and postpartum doula. So that's the mental health and the physical health. But I'd say my sort of everyday women's health hack is my plant-based diet, adaptogens, microgreens, cacao, and my green juices, right? So I think that's sort of my sort of everyday women's health hack. Yeah, so that's my sort of quick intro, Archana. I know we're going to delve more deeply.
That's
later on.
fantastic. Just between our speakers, if women can just take on each one of those hacks, I think we would be in a better, healthier place for each one of us. So fantastic. Hey, so I just wanted to dive in. We did talk about all the P's and the M's that happen in women, like so puberty, we got the, prepartum, pregnancy, postpartum, premenopausal syndrome, and then eventually arriving to menopause. So let's kind of dive into all of these kind of milestones that keep coming up in our life, either periodic basis or monthly basis or frequent basis. And one of the areas that are highly impactful for women is infertility, because that kind of has the longest footprint in their reproductive age, with a lot of wrapped around trauma, sadness, hormones, all of the treatment pathways, new technology, all of this. So before we arrive to the discussion around infertility, I wanted to ask a question around root cause of infertility. And I would like to pull in Dr. Tendai to kind of enlighten us, like, what are you seeing, especially working in the fertility clinic? What are the root causes of infertility that you encounter most commonly in women who come to see you?
Thank you, Archana. So that's a very good question. Just to start off with, essentially, infertility in someone who is under 35 is trying with regular intercourse over a 12-month period, and somebody over 35 for a 6-month period without any success in terms of getting pregnant. So as a fertility specialist, I see sort of 2 sides of the coin, where it may be a cause in the woman, whereby it could be a disorder like polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis, things like that. It could be something structural like fibroids or blocked tubes, either from a prior infection or from prior sterilization for contraception reasons. And then also we see quite a lot of women who are over the age of 35 or even over the age of 40, who are then seeking to start their families at that time, and sometimes will have difficulties trying to conceive. And then there are some genetic conditions that also cause infertility, as well as medical disorders where sometimes women are taking medications that may result in infertility, particularly things like chemotherapy, radiation therapy to treat cancers. And then the other cause of infertility that's not so often recognized is male factor, where 35% of infertility is actually caused by male factor. And this can be either, with low sperm counts, low motility of the sperm, and things like that as well.
That is a really good kind of, the whole landscape of all that can cause the fertility problems. But it would be really good to know what percentage of it is kind of voluntary deferral of fertility that can lead to kind of mid-age where women start to think about family planning. And then what percentage of those are true like medical conditions, like what you talked about, polycystic ovarian, being on primary care. I do see thyroid issues as other reasons why we could see fertility issues. One other area that I wanted to kind of highlight is that women take a longer time to ask the right question around fertility because they feel like they're alone in this whole entire journey. And there is a hesitancy, and I've seen this again and again in my practice, is like when they cannot get pregnant, they feel that this blame is on them, which you're enlightening our viewers and audience that 35%, I mean, by the way, it's not a blame, it's a medical condition, and 35% can be sitting on the male side. And so we need to have both individuals be evaluated, and asking that first question becomes almost like the most necessary step in getting care from the provider. But it would be lovely to kind of hear about like what is the breakdown? Is that, you know, milestone driven, which is my marriage, my career, my others, especially with new technology around cryopreservation and at least the comfort that you can preserve your fertility. But also I would love for you to kind of share what the success rate would look like with cryopreservation and fertility treatments.
Absolutely. So in terms of the breakdown of women that I see, being in New York, it's quite a fast-paced lifestyle. So
Yes.
a lot of women are, you know, in the midst of their career, so they are not thinking of starting families at this time. So they do fall back on fertility preservation. The good thing is that a lot of organizations and companies are now starting to recognize this and are actually starting to cover it in terms of cover the actual cycles and the payments for it. But we still have quite a long way to go in terms of insurance coverage, which I'm sure you're going to delve into too. In terms of what I see in my practice in New York, I would say it's 50-50 breakdown of women who are coming in because they are actively trying to get pregnant under the age of 35 versus women who have delayed childbearing and are now coming in because they are having difficulty getting pregnant because of their age.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. I want to, Archana, I want to bring in Jean, but also just open up to anyone to answer the initial question Archana had asked, which was the root cause of infertility.
Comment about what we're talking about right now is, of course, you know, I observe a great delay between a couple starting to seek pregnant for the woman and to finally get in a fertility clinic.
Yes.
I think there is a huge need to screen for infertility and to push for a program, you know, to identify people with factors of fertility before they get in a fertility clinic, because I think we lose many years of fertility because of that, because they're waiting, you know, we will see the next cycle, we'll see the next year. I think, I don't know if you feel the same in your clinics, but it's a pity to see this, you know, this delay in take care and to screen these fertility reasons.
I absolutely agree, Jean. This is something that we almost typically see 3 to 5 years delay by the time a woman realizes that they're not able to conceive to the time they actually see the fertility specialist. And part of it is on them to like asking the first question, but also part of it is the referral process and also the wait in time and the workup and then the cycle timing. So all of those kind of delays the care that they need. I also feel like in the primary care space, if we have more awareness and of primary care providers of screening what you're mentioning, and also being proactive in referring the older women faster into the fertility specialist, that would be really, really helpful. Building out protocols that could be relevant. Tammy, you were agreeing upon the root cause and the quick referral cycle. You practice in women's health clinic and also in the setting of like medical missions in underdeveloped countries. What
Yes.
have you seen as a root cause for infertility?
Yeah, so I agree with Dr. Chawari, like with the physiological causes, but also I'm noticing a lot of women, especially in my primary care clinic, wanting to get off birth control and wanting a more of a natural approach for fertility awareness. And some of the resources that I found that are helpful for that are facts. It's factsaboutfertility.org and femhealth.org, which gives more of a natural approach, because as we know, there are certain types of hormonal birth control that can stop ovulation, like the Depo-Provera and certain hormonal IUDs. And it can affect women. I mean, think about it. If some of these girls are started on birth control 14, 15 years old, and they wait till they're 35 before they want to start having babies and families, this is a long, there's been a lot of just changes and side effects that have happened to their natural cycle. Sometimes birth control can basically trick the body to thinking that the body's pregnant. So it keeps the endometrial lining very thin, which is not the natural cycle, because the endometrium, as we know, it gets thicken, and then sheds the lining, is the natural process. So those types of things can affect fertility. I think also environmental factors, our food, the chemical exposure, also their estrogenic, just chemical exposure, hormone disruptors, things like that, that we're starting to finally see and look into, and research is talking about, that are affecting fertility as well. And in comparison to developing countries, we don't see those same types of things. Something that's very unique about America is, even though we are a very wealthy nation, we're also a very sick nation. We have a lot of obesity, and insulin resistance is another root cause and factor for infertility. So when we have a morbid obesity situation, I know, like even for fertility clinics, you have to be a certain BMI before we can even start any kind of intervention. So things like that, I think, are all other root causes that we need to tap into and think about, as well as doing hormonal balance for hormone restorative endocrinology, just balancing those hormones. Some women might be deficient in progesterone or low in estrogen, and there's things that we can do to tap into to help empower the body to do better.
There's a really good point that you brought in, Tammy, developing versus underdeveloped countries and others, but also how do you regulate the hormones? Women, stress is directly contributing towards women's hormone. And I do believe that, especially as a primary care provider, one thing that we do is ACE screening, which is adverse childhood experience training, that typically carries through a woman's life to the whole entire piece that we talked about. It impacts the puberty, it impacts the PMS, it impacts the pregnancy or fertility thereby, and then also the menopausal experience. So that would be a really, really good consideration for people to screen their patients or themselves for an advanced childhood experience that can impact all of the hormones that could be playing out in the body. Bambi,
Absolutely.
Yes.
We're kind of jumping all over
Yes.
but it's all great. But the things that sort of Tammy brought up, and I definitely want to get into the awareness. How do we create more awareness and close the gap between the women who are seeing their primary care physicians and then the fertility specialists? But Tammy did bring up a great point too about some of these other causes of infertility. So I want to bring in Jillian here, because Tammy brought up, because Jillian is at a telehealth women's health clinic that doesn't just focus on fertility. In fact, that is relatively new, but there's a lot of offerings and services for women. And I'm wondering, given that you have this captive audience of women, I believe, I don't know how many patients you have on there, but Tammy mentioned, you know, there's side effects, there's downside effects of birth control, there's environmental factors as well, but there's obesity concerns, insulin, there's a lot of different things that it can affect your fertility. And do you create awareness to your group about really what you need to know about fertility and infertility? And it's not just, okay, here's your ovulation packet down the road when you want to consider fertility, but these are the things that you need to consider through your lifetime. And these are the downside effects of the things that you're taking.
Well, I mean, I think the other side of the coin, though, is to remember that contraception and preventing pregnancy and preventing unintended pregnancy is also a really important component of women's health. 50% of pregnancies are unplanned. And, you know, a lot of those are undesired. And we have really good data on, you know, UCSF, speaking of the Bay Area, just did a beautiful study called the Turnaway Study, looking at the social, emotional, physical impacts of women that had an unplanned pregnancy. They, you know, and those that wanted to continue the pregnancy and those that did not, and what the consequences of that were. So I think, you know, kind of the other flip-flop of the discussion, I mean, yes, we're talking about infertility, but you know, ultimately if we're talking about women and taking care of women, we're talking about control over your fertility and being able to plan your life, whether you want 0 children or 10, right? And so I think one of the things that we do really well at WISP is talk about contraception in the sense of, you know, preventing pregnancy and being able to become pregnant when you want to, is right, super important. I think that side effects are certainly important. One of the things that I think is a really important educational piece when you're talking about contraception is there is not a one size fits all approach. So when you're talking about contraception, you're talking about, well, you know, in part of that clinical context should be, well, do you think you want to become pregnant? Well, when do you think you want to become pregnant? Because the return to fertility and ovulation is different for different types of contraception, right? Depo-Provera, Nexplanon takes a little bit longer, IUD a little bit quicker. So really talking about, yes, the side effects and return to fertility in the immediate sense is a really important component of contraception prescribing and then management.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, now I want to get to, okay, the prenatal process, sort of what these women pregnant women are going through. And now that we know that the problem is that the problem with infertility is a lot that a lot of women are getting older, 35 to 45 now. There's an increase. There was a study, I believe it was in the CDC, and it showed that the fertility rate of 15 to 19-year-olds was 61%, hoping those were mostly like 18, 19, 20 to 24-year-olds, it was 116%. And then women 40 to 44 was 6%. This was in 1970. 30 years later, it's sort of flip-flop. Now we see all the women under 30, they've gone down, and all the women over 30 and closer to 45, they've gone up. So when you look at the makeup of all the women that are pregnant now, that means those clinics and these women going to the clinics like Tendai's, like Jean's, they're probably different than they were 15 years ago, certainly 30 years ago. And the prenatal process, the prenatal care must be different for women who are older. And so I was wondering, Jean, if you could talk about, you know, what is the makeup of the women who come to see you,
Yes.
and how is that prenatal process changed?
You know, before to talk about the pregnancy. Also, just to comment about fertility, you have some causes that you can act by medical therapy, by a medication to try to find a solution for fertility. But also, you have genetic causes of infertility. So perhaps in the evaluation of the fertility of a couple, the genetic part has to be, more large than we used to do that, because these causes are going to impact, the success of the fertility clinics and the way you are going to take care of the fertility of this couple for the man and the woman. So genetic screening has made, huge, advances even to evaluate the fertility of couples. And so we have to put these new tools in use, because right now we do some kind of genetic screening of these couples, but it's quite limited compared to the tools we have right now. This is the first thing. Second thing, of course, we see the rise of the age of the patients during the pregnancy. So we see more at-risk pregnancies, and we see also more complications during the pregnancy. So, in the same time, we observe a revolution in genomic, technologies. And right now, we're able, just on a blood draw, to screen for not only Down syndrome or the main trisomies, but a large part of genetic pathologies. So just on a blood draw for the woman. So with this new tool, and with the prices decreasing, we can use this tool to offer to couples if they are, open to screen for genetic pathologies of the baby very early during the pregnancy, and to have the knowledge if the baby is in a good health or have some kind of genetic pathology, and to do the right choice, to better, accept the baby after birth, or perhaps to even discuss with the doctor about an abortion, or to find other solution to get pregnant for an healthy baby.
How accurate have we gotten in these genetic screenings? Because we're making a decision about,
You think, I do a huge number of genetic testings during a year, more than 5,000 of these testings. And on these testings, you have a large part of just normal, results. And the patients are so happy to get, confident to get a child with an health child after birth. And after, I have a number between 5 to 10% of abnormalities. And it is a very, very small number of cases when the results are not very clear, 100%, So I think the advantage to use these technologies are more large than the consequences to use it. And we just have to have, the good professionals to educate the patients, to discuss about the limitations of the technologies, and to choose the good test for the good couple, the good choice of the pregnant woman, and to better explain, and also to have a good follow-up for the results and during pregnancy. It's why in our company we never sell a test, just a test. If we work with another network of clinic, we can sell a test, and we can work with other professionals, but we every time do the follow-up of and the advice to the professional or to the patients of the results, and exactly what we are sure about, what we are not sure about. So I don't know if it's very clear, but it's one.
Yeah, it's fair. Well, I had a feeling that the prenatal sort of care process would be a lot more frequent with somebody, older. So you talked about there's more testing, genetic testing for the parents, there's more complications, and then there's more genetic testing to find out what's being passed along to the children, babies, perhaps. So,
Exactly, and the testing is more, reliable, and it's more easy It's more safe for the patients. When I start my studies at the time, every woman wanted to get an amniocentesis, but we have a lot of pregnancy losses with amniocentesis, but with a simple blood draw now it's safe. And also the prices of this genetic testing decrease a lot since the 80s or the 90s. So we can use it and we can promote it in our clinics.
Got it. Not to jump into the payment side, but you're out of pocket, correct?
I am 100 time full public doctor on Monday and Tuesday, and the other days I'm working on the private clinic, and of course this only out of pocket money. But do not forget that many assurance companies now cover these testings. For example, we just signed an agreement with one of the biggest assurance companies in Canada. The name is Desjardins Assurances. They have, I think, nearly 2 million people, covered, and they are going to cover our testing. So I think there is a way now to find, patients to be covered for these testings. And it's more and more, easy right now.
Yeah, Tendai, because you have a similar clinic, do you do your own genetic testings?
We do. So we do initially when a couple or a person will come in for the initial fertility testing, we do what we call carrier screening, which checks for recessive disorders that can be passed on to the offspring. So we do test couples for that, or individuals who are planning pregnancy. And then if women do IVF, we do pre-implantation genetic testing, and there's a couple of forms of that. One is looking for what we call aneuploidy, which is abnormalities in the chromosome numbers. So typically, what Jean mentioned in terms of trisomies, where there's additional chromosomes or missing chromosomes as well. And then we also look for specific disorders in terms of things like sickle cell anemia or cystic fibrosis, those actual genes in chromosomes. So we can test the embryos prior to actually transferring the embryo back into the woman's body. We can have answers as to whether an embryo carries those disorders.
Do you, go ahead, Jim.
I just want to comment because this is very important, about the career screening, because we talk very often about, Down syndrome screening and screening during pregnancy for chromosome abnormalities. But I think the career screening is something very important. For the woman under 35 years old, the main risk is not a Down syndrome, is a genetic pathology because the parents are carrying a deficiency of a gene each other before get pregnant. So I think this career screening is something we have to push and to disseminate to people very early in the age, to see if there is a risk to get a deficiency for a child or a cause of infertility. And this is something that is more easy now to organize, and something we have to push in for all patients. So
yeah, and I wanted to also double click on testing, especially inside of the infertility space, where testing is happening around the embryo that is being secured. Especially genetic testing to see which embryo is better quality. Is that something that is happening inside of the infertility embryologist space?
yes, it's something I don't know, Dr. Shiwa, if you want to comment, but I can comment also. But for example, in the Quebec province, we have already a list of pathologies already covered by the public health system. And if one of the parents have a genetic translocation, it's not very rare. It's 1 people in 500 have a translocation, have a chromosome abnormality. So for these parents, for example, it's more, efficient to go to a fertility clinic and to get embryos and to test by pre-implantatoire diagnosis the embryos. In this manner, you will get more success for the fertility clinic, and also you will have more healthy embryos and more healthy child at birth. So this is something. This is a huge advance also, and we can do that with many genetic pathologies now. And if we found during our evaluation genetic pathology in the family, we can test the parents to see if there is a risk for these pathologies. Even by the carrier screening for recessive pathology, we do also like that.
That's great. And shifting gears a little bit from looking at testing and genetics to, how do we fund this? So I'm going to ask Lakeisha, are you starting to see inside of your innovations that are pitching to you that are in women's health space, specifically focused on fertility or enhancing fertility and others, or even genetic testing?
Sure. No, happy to speak on that. I think before jumping in, I think so much of the conversation today is so helpful to listeners when you're, so often, and I just want to reiterate this point that's so incredibly important around timing. Part of some of the startups and some of the innovations that we've seen really do highlight the need to collapse time as it relates to these sort of women who are looking to grow their families. And we're seeing founders essentially try to do that, right? And so I can't remember who on the phone said that just this, I think it might have been you, Tendai, this it's something so simple, which is being able to track your menstrual cycle. Like that's just something that folks are not doing. And it's and yet there are so many implications to doing it, right? And so I think what we are seeing is a response to a lot of what you all have highlighted around the importance of collapsing time. It's like, how do we take folks, how do we collapse time such that it becomes normal through whether it's an app or, there's a lot of conversation around how do we then collapse time such that women on their fertility journey start with, working with an expert. Like you sort of start there rather than, taking that sort of 3 to 5 year period to figure out, hey, I think I may need some help, because all of the things that you've already said, that you all have said, really point to some of the innovations. And I don't even know that I would necessarily call them innovation so much as responses, right? Solutions that are in the market. But before I even go into that, it'd be interesting, I think helpful for this to kind of set a little bit of context and landscaping around fertility tech. So of course there's sort of, women's health as a large vertical, something that you know very well, Tammy. But under fertility tech, right? When we think about fertility tech, it's really it's the technology oriented or tech enabled medical solutions that are focused on couples looking to or individuals looking to conceive, right? So that might be hormone testing systems, monitoring platforms that we're looking at, egg freezing services, sperm and egg freezing services, fertility tracking, ovulation tracking, etc. And according to PitchBook, there have been about 263 deals that were funded and $1.93 billion in capital invested over time. And that self-proclaimed investors that are investing in the space, about 547. And so that's sort of over time. And we'd say in the past year, there's been about, in the past year over year, let me make sure that $295 million has been dollars have been invested in fertility tech. And so while that actually sounds like it might be a lot of money, it actually is not. When you begin to think about the amount of capital that's needed for a company to go from that sort of pre-seed to seed, Series A, Series B onward. And I'll actually just pause for a moment, Bambi and Archana, just to understand for the audience. Should I sort of double click, or be a little bit high level? Okay.
No, absolutely. Because I think it is important. Our audience are innovators too, so they would appreciate the double click on it.
Okay, great. So when you're thinking about $295 million going into year-over-year investment in the space, there's a couple of things that start to stand out, right? There are only about 79 companies that identify themselves as specifically fertility tech. We're not talking about women's health as a whole. And when you're looking at capital going into the space, it really does curtail innovation, because if you got 547 investors that are investing, that consider themselves investors in fertility tech, typically these investors are investing in far more than fertility tech. It's women's health, and this is an area that they might consider. And so what starts to happen is the amount of capital that's going into the early stage investing slows in a market like we're in today. And more what you'll see is follow-on dollars going into these founders, right? And so early innovation sort of essentially starts to slow down a little bit. And so, so that's part one. The other thing that when we were thinking about fertility tech and what we're seeing in the space, and before I talk about some of the actual companies, just year over year, from a kind of growth metric standpoint, there were 16 deals that were executed year over year. So we're talking about capital going directly into less than 25 fertility tech companies, right? And so our interest as an early stage venture firm, and I can actually share some of this data if we want to share it with anyone who's listening would like to look at some of this data. It's sort of pitch book internal stats, but what we start to become a bit concerned about is if the need, I don't know, how do I say this well? Last night I was speaking at the Women in Bio Summit, where they showcased a film about investing in women, and a lot of this sort of scientists and doctors that came up to me yesterday and really spoke, they said a lot of their challenges, the challenge that they see is there's awareness of challenges, there's awareness of even solutions. But where things really start to drop off is the commercialization of those solutions, because the need for capital is a bit more patient than what the venture capital model allows for, right? And so there are certainly venture dollars go into the space, but when you're thinking about FDA approvals, right? When you're thinking about the actual process of taking an idea, verifying that you're onto something, beginning that process of getting those early FDA approvals, getting to clinical trials, then getting to the point where you can actually begin to bring some of these products to market. That time frame can increase the risk level such that investors may actually say that they're investing in fertility tech, but not putting enough capital into space, and where we're not able to fund as much innovation. The innovation and the demand for capital is not necessarily met with the availability and the supply, which is something that we at Emmeline and Suncoast and others are really looking to change. And the way that we look to change it is by changing the conversation around why it's important to invest in women's health. I think, I chuckle to myself sometimes to think, wow, we're having conversations about menopause, which I know we'll probably get to a little bit later, and fertility, even puberty, and some solutions one could argue have existed but needed the capital to go to market, and to not even just go to market, to go through the process of being able to go to market, but the challenge was more the capital didn't exist, right? And so what we're really looking to do is to make a shift in terms of who's writing checks, right? We know that research points to, based on who is writing checks, based on the theses of venture firms, based on the thesis of an investor profile, that determines what they invest in. And what we need to do is bring in more folks who have capital, but did not quite understand that they could write a check into an early stage women's health, fertility tech business, or maternity focused business like that. If we could begin to then bring in that awareness, Archana, to women, to people like Jean, who understand how important it is to get early innovation funded, then we can begin to accelerate some of the innovations and accelerate them getting to market.
It sounds like what you're saying is that we're in the really early stages. And what I see when we're at the real early stages of certain topics, of certain areas, what VCs and investors tend to do is they aggregate the network. And so, and we've seen this with even Kindbody, which is sort of focused on fertility, and Progeny, which is the predecessor, the founder founded Progeny. It was all, let's invest in a company that can aggregate all of the expertise and specialists, because the product, it sounds like what you're saying, Lakeisha, is like the product, they get demand, but they don't get demand, right? I mean, they're trying things out, but you really need a critical mass of the specialists. That's what you can rely on. Get their critical mass of specialists together. And then you have an offering, you have a product, which is the critical mass of specialists, which is somewhat what, what Jean is doing, because now he has a footprint of about 34 clinics, where he's, distributing his G-Life product there. But so I wanted to talk to, again, back to John and the ones that are actually having the clinics here. Lakeisha talked about, look, what's really interesting, what she thinks she's seeing is, technology that can collapse the time between the patient seeing the primary care physician to the fertility specialist. So I'm curious, both to John and Tendai, how are these women getting to you? And how are you closing the gap? What can we do to close that gap between the OBGYN or the primary care physician to you? So they're not waiting a year, or as Archana said, 3 to 5 years.
That's a very good question, and it's why I already talk about, we have to find a new kind of product and solution for these patients to get somehow a clinical evaluation and fertility evaluation before they get to the fertility clinic. So this kind, we have the goal in our company, and it's all not already done for the moment, to create a sort of product easy to do that remotely with colleagues, in different regions of Canada or US or everywhere, but to a way to do an evaluation based on, of course, medical, recognized solutions, and to have a sort of more easy access fertility package. And I think this kind of product do not exist, at my knowledge, on the market, and it's very difficult to get also money from VCs for that, because what the VCs want, they want IPs. Do you have IPs? If you have IPs, okay, we can break money for that. And even with my company, I have an IP with a Illumina company, so we are able to do IPs. But when we want to create a product who women need this product, it's more difficult to get money and financed for this kind of product, because there's no an IP of how to do things. It's more, I don't know if it's very clear but it's more difficult to get money for that. For example, we create our first clinic in Quebec City, and after we create 8 clinics in Montreal. Now we have we own 9 own clinics, but we are also working with 34 other clinics, and as a product in the clinics. But we can create a huge network of clinic in all Canada, for example, on the same model. But to get money for that and to help to create this network, it's more difficult to get it than to ask for finance for an IP for a new technology, because everything is about new technology and AI right now.
Yeah, and I think coming almost kind of combining your comments with Lakeisha's, is that femtech, and I'm calling femtech, not just fertility tech, because femtech is technically fertility and all of the P's that we talked about, has a component of diagnostic, a component of therapeutic, and then a component of operational kind of network effect. And we put it in digital health space, which is the wrong way of looking at it. And well, Thermo Fisher needed a lot more money to come up with diagnostic tests for COVID and others. And we need to think it like, hey, part of femtech There's certain subset that is a diagnostic. There is certain subset that is med devices or software as a medical device, for example, whether it is accurately predicting fertility and others. So those need to be categorized and almost like bucketed so that different level of deal flow happens differently, because we're a lot more forgiving in the pharma, med device, life sciences space on having longer patient cycle, and then also the fund that flows. Nikisha, have you like seen it to be classified differently? Because I feel like digital health kind of hurts us more if we call it the digital health solution.
Yeah. Just to make sure I'm tracking, I think your question is how does categorization impact valuation?
Or even deal flow. So you were saying that what we are seeing is we cluster all of these things together. And what Bambi said is like what got funded was a network of physicians,
Right.
And not so much the diagnostic or the product. And what Jean is saying is, hey, we need an IP before things get funded. But it is like it's almost like a combination of three things. One is a diagnostic, which is almost like Thermo Fisher or others like LabCorp and others, like that is a component of femtech. The other one is med device. It's almost like Libre or Dexcom and others that are really seeing where the woman is in the fertility cycle or menopause cycle and others. And then the third is the network, which is the physicians who will use this diagnosis, this med device into executing a fertility treatment or others. And I don't think we are seeing it in that level of granularity when we are funding
Not
it.
at all. I think, but part of the reason for that, Archana, is that you know, when you look at the profile of many healthcare investors, particularly as it relates to women's health, there's a bit of a chasm between actual practitioners, typically, and scientists who are aware of solutions, and then commercialization, right? And so because there's such a chasm between, and I actually want to talk about innovation. So med devices, not necessarily like med devices, diagnostics, network we'll put a hold on, but I'm talking about sort of real innovation in the space where scientists are finding potential solutions that could have meaningful change. They typically have very little awareness, understanding of the business component on how do you fundraise for something like that, how do you commercialize. And so the reason that's important is how they ought to be categorized, how they ought to position themselves from a fundraising perspective, even from an exiting perspective, is there's just such a mismatch and such a disconnect that yes, there is a problem with how these kind of early innovations are funded. It's because there's a disconnect. And so and then when you think of the investors, I can guarantee you that the bulk of the investors, Archana, cannot come into that sort of nuanced understanding that scientist has to say, okay, this is precisely how you ought to be thinking about categorizing, right? And so I've seen it, and it comes up a good deal. And so I think, yes, you're right. There's a need for, I don't know, you could call this you could really think of this in many ways as the wild, wild west of healthcare, women's health, right? You've got McKinsey just put out in 2024 a report that really called out the $1 trillion market opportunity by investing in women's health. It's 2024, and in many cases, so many people would say, but how does this opportunity exist in 2024 when so many of these solutions should have already existed, right? You've got the Biden administration announcing an initiative to begin to fund research in women's health because there's still fundamental research that does not exist in mass around women's health, right? And so because we're in a you have investors investing in a truly, it's not a mature market opportunity space. In fact, PitchBook called women's health an emerging market, right?
Yes, it is. It
It
is.
is.
And I think because women, by growing inside of the workforce, have found their voice and they're asking for solutions, whether it's fertility advancement or enhancement, or more so now, menopause support.
Yeah.
Because now women are like sitting in the exec suite getting a brain fog because they have menopause. And they're like, what the heck? I was able to do 10 things before, and now I'm doing 2 things. What is going on? Help, and come with the technology. We'll hear it all. So that is definitely changing for sure. We quantified $24 billion are spent on menopause related conditions in the US in a year.
Before we jump into menopause, I did want to bring in Tammy just to talk a little bit about, and unless we want to jump into menopause for sure, but Tammy, what are you seeing in the early stages with regards to fertility?
Yeah, I have to agree with Lakeisha, because there's so many barriers and so many. When you said the word chasm, that totally resonated with me. I said, oh my gosh, there is such a huge gap and disconnect from the provider, the entrepreneur, the investor, the technology, like all of that. It's just, I'm seeing this from a, on the boots ground as a provider standpoint, and also at these investor conferences and pitch conferences. And, if the innovation isn't married to someone who understands a provider's workflow and the challenges that they have, meaning there's not too many, we have a shortage in OBGYNs, and we have, all these other issues that make it more difficult for an average provider to implement new innovation and new tech. It's just going to be challenging. And then on the flip side, from the investor standpoint, truth be told, most investors are still men, and men don't want to hear about female problems. They don't even understand it. They're like, oh, let me ask my wife about it. But there's a lot of barriers, there's a lot of gaps, and there's a huge chasm. Bambi, I'm sorry, I might have stepped out of the topic. What was your question again?
Investments in fertility, or what startups you are seeing
Yes.
with regards to fertility.
Can I jump in quickly just to say I agree with
Sure.
Tammy? So Tammy, I just have to we don't have to ping pong forever, but I loved everything that you said, particularly highlighting the point around beginning to bring in shifting the investor pool, right? Because when I gave some of the earlier stats around how many investors are investing in the space, a bulk of them still do not have an appreciation for the market and the economic opportunity that's being unlocked by these entrepreneurs. And I had a founder tell me, that one of our menopause companies said, just on her fundraising journey, she would just constantly be told that, menopause is a niche market, right? And I don't think any of us on this phone would agree with that statement. And so I think I absolutely agree with that. I think it's a really important point to highlight, which is why I think the work you're doing, Tammy, and that I'm doing on the investing side is so critically important. But then there's the other piece of the work, which is what I was doing last night, talking to women in bio, to say, you are part of the solution, investing.
Right. Yes.
In these solutions, because you understand this, and you act, and all these women, they're like, oh, I can invest. It's like, if you are making this much money, and it doesn't have to be a $250,000 check, it can be a $30,000 check. But guess what? You're turning on your innovative thinking. You're able to come closer to, funds that are investing in women's health, and then we can actually kind of get checks much earlier and faster to some of these innovations coming out in women's health.
That's right. People do get excited when women are involved, and this is an exciting market and niche to bring women, because they do have that voice, and to bring them and empower them to be those leaders in this area is important. As far as innovation and devices, we're seeing a lot of apps out there like Mother Goose, or just different types of apps that try to, whether it's in the prenatal stage or the fertility stage, or even in the postpartum stage. So there's a lot of apps out there that are trying to support. I just wish everybody was talking to each other, so it was one big long connectivity. So, because again, we're trying to get these providers to use this, or maybe even just from the commercial standpoint, for the patients to use it. It just makes it difficult when there's a lot of distraction and a lot of noise out there with the apps, but I'm grateful for that innovation. Another space that I'm really excited about, we just recently invested in radiant oximetry. And so they are more in the intrapartum space. So for patients that are in giving birth, and they developed this new tool for fetal oximetry detection and separating that from the mother's post-ox, et cetera. So that type of technology gets me really excited because maternal fetal health has just been so archaic for so long. We need those types of things that the FDA is approving, pushing along, and making it the new gold standard. And so that type of stuff I'm seeing, as well as menopause, which is a totally new, totally different market in and of itself. So I'd like to hear more from the other experts.
Yeah. So should we jump into menopause? Some people slide into it, some people dive into it.
So
Just-
how about we start by saying, does late infertility sort of
Just a comment before I jump to menopause. Also, you know, the women health is a very good way to get also to the whole family health, because women are advised, you know, about many things and are checking about everything in the family. So I think to get a contact with the woman, it's a very good way also to have solutions for all the family, the children, the husband, everyone. So I think it's important to implicate every time, you know, the woman in this is the decisions. Sorry.
I would like to bring Jillian in here because she's been sitting there so so respectfully. I actually want to jump in there, but you know, she's kind of seeing the whole, she takes care of all, you know, women's health, not specifically fertility, not specifically menopause, but as you see what you're focused on at WISP and where the needs are, how do you look at the infertility challenges as well as menopause, and where are your priorities?
Yeah, great question. Because and I was about to chime in because as we were talking about the new fertility technologies, because WISP is actually, we're moving towards partnering with doing some home fertility testing. And I think one thing that's really cool about Gen Z and younger women is that they're really taking charge and taking control over their fertility and their fertility planning. And they like to get a temp check. They want the information. They want to know what their ovarian reserve looks like. They want this information. And so not that we particularly serve just that population, but I think it's something that's becoming really popular among younger women. Of course, we've mentioned egg freezing already. You know, that's just another example of how women, younger women, are really wanting to take charge of these spaces. So we're starting to partner with WISP on, you know, sort of the early home fertility testing. The technology is still emerging, but I think what's coming is really interesting and exciting. Of course, you know, we've already mentioned we do the contraception, so that's a super important piece. And then we are talking about getting into the menopause space. We're trying to figure out the best way to do that. I think one of the realizations in recent years is that, you know, menopause, it is, like you said, like some people ease in, some people dive in. Like menopause is incredibly individual. And so we have a sort of set, at this point, growing toolbox to treat women, but it's not huge. And so trying to figure out the best options and tinkering and tailoring those best options for women in menopause is a really interesting space. And there is tremendous opportunity in telemedicine for that to, you know, to connect with women, to talk to them about their symptoms, because a lot of menopause treatment, right, is symptom driven. And so to really work with them using telemedicine to provide them with care. And so I think a lot of companies are trying to figure out the best way to do that right now. What's safe, what's not, what's safe for the patient, safe for the physician, and just really working on finding that really nice lane. And so I know that WISP wants to do that You know, as I mentioned, I'm relatively new to the company, and so that's something that we're excited to like work on together.
I see Tendai like nodding, so I need to
Yeah.
ask her what is it that that Jillian was saying that
Yes.
you wanted to.
Yeah, no, I'm really grateful for organizations and companies like Jillian's company that are focusing on women's health, and also because if you look at the US, there's only about 1,200 fertility specialists who are board certified and trained in infertility, right? So a lot of women who come and see us have come sort of through the filter of their OBGYN or through the filter of the nurse practitioner like Tammy and midwives, right? And they've had some sort of treatment, they've had some diagnostics done with the OBGYNs, the nurse practitioners, midwives, and then they're coming to us for more complex treatments. So definitely taking a step back and seeing what technologies, as Lakeisha was saying, would help with helping women in that initial phase, where just like using a simple app, right? And realizing, well, actually my period doesn't come every month because you haven't really been tracking it. And that's where then the OBGYNs, the nurse practitioners, midwives can say, well, actually, yes, we need to fast track you to a fertility specialist, because that's not something that, you know, that's not something that needs to be managed.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great point that you made about being, you know, you're highly trained, fellowship trained specialist, and a lot of you know, REIs are right concentrated in kind of more urban areas, and we're really, you know, one thing that's super important to us at WISP is a mission for the company is like to expand access, right? Because we know, I mean, I'm in Texas now. The OBGYN and women's healthcare deserts in places like Texas are heartbreaking, and so anything that sort of even expands that access a little bit to get you to the next step, to get you to the next step, to get you to the REI, that expansion is just is super important.
And to your point, Jillian, like in the 10 or 14 years that I was at Stanford, that was kind of like our REI clinic was so impacted that as a family physician, I was doing all of the workup and collapsing the time. Because, you know, think of like that 5 year, 3 to 5 years that I'm talking about, it's real. And to Lakeisha's point, like whatever collapses that time. So the more we build out that funnel that catches women in their fertility cycle and fast tracks the one, triage the ones that need to see their fertility specialist fastest, is going to be an immense help from access perspective. So this looks like pretty promising. I see the hand up from Tammy. Tammy, you had a question or a comment.
Yes, I did. I just wanted to take advantage of the fact that we have like these amazing experts right now. And I wanted to know your thoughts on either your favorite fertility tracker, device, app. What do you think of Anido, Keg, Mira, all of those types of devices? And which do you recommend to your patients?
And let me add also maybe sort of a menopause app, and then also bring in Lakeisha, because I know she has to jump pretty soon. So maybe Lakeisha, your favorite apps, fertility apps that Tammy mentioned, or menopause that you're starting to look in and invest in.
I can't name our favorite menopause companies. They would listen in and say, oh my goodness, Emily's going to invest. And so we are talking to a few. So I can't comment on that yet, but I will please anyone who's interested in Emmeline follow us, because you'll hear about the announcement soon and you'll know which are some of our favorites. But on the fertility, you know, we haven't written checks. We intend to write checks into Fertility Solutions. My brilliant partner Naseem is leading that charge, and there's just been an internal thesis around you know, really formulating what is sort of that best way to collapse time, right? And so wanting to be clear and targeted in that investment. So we have not written a check yet into a fertility solution. We've talked to a lot of founders. But I'll say for my own journey, and I don't know if this was your journey, Tammy, but what's interesting about myself and my partners, one of us adopted a kid, one of us and two of us went through that sort of just traditional process, not necessarily needing to partner with a fertility specialist. What I will say, Ovia has been one of the apps that's constantly recommended, and a lot of sort of the mom groups that I'm on, I used it a lot. I thought it was really great. I haven't had a need for an updated one. I'm looking on my phone right now. I'd probably say Ovia. It also what's been interesting about Ovia as an investment, it has performed quite well. And ultimately, if I'm correct, Ovia exited, wasn't Ovia acquired?
Yes, it was acquired. It didn't exit. I think it is Progeny that exited, that did an IPO, but the OVA
Did they IPO? I thought it was a PE acquisition. Let me see.
Progeny.
Let's see.
It was a very flop IPO, I believe.
Yep, you're right.
Yeah.
Progeny was an IPO. Yep.
Anyone else have fertility apps that they are interested, their favorite?
Dr. Tendai, Jane, Jillian, anything?
I've heard good things about Ovia.
Yes, I have quite a few patients who do use Ovia. There are a couple of glitches with it that I've noticed, but in general, it is a good app and a lot of people find it very useful. One other app that a lot of patients will use other apps are the mental health fertility apps, because going through infertility treatments and, essentially, even if you're not infertile and trying to get pregnant, it can be quite taxing on mental health. So we always recommend mental health apps as well.
And which ones do you see that your patients are using?
So it varies. Some patients are using one called Calm, that one, and then there's one by Ferring as well. I can't quite remember the name.
Is that Mind Strong, or because Calm is the possibly the more common one? Yeah.
Here's a question. I think this is a really interesting one. This is somewhat targeted to Jillian. Jillian mentioned that Gen Z women are more open about their fertility needs. I would say, yeah, Gen Z is pretty open about all their needs. You see a generational gap when it comes to patients and their embrace of femtech apps. I guess the older generation would be a little bit more, there would be more of a stigma around fertility issues. So what do you see that?
I would say well, I think what I see the most of is not necessarily generational, because I do think that they're younger women, Gen Z, millennials, and in the spaces that I've been working in, so this might be a little bit of a bias, but like they're concerned about where their data is going. So everybody's using the apps and everybody likes them, but they're also talking really frequently about using the apps and where their data is going, especially in a place like Texas. Young women are very afraid of their last menstrual period and their cycles being tracked or found or mined, because that has been something that's been talked about in the reproductive justice and reproductive freedom space. So that seems to be more, actually, like younger women are a little bit more suspicious. They love the technologies and they want to use them, but in that particular angle, in places like Texas, it's of grave concern for a lot of women.
Jean, what do you see generationally? Do you see a difference in behavior and openness about fertility concerns? Or are the Gen Z more open, and are they more actively communicating this, and so it's easier to get to them and treat them?
I think that we have the same concerns with the data. Right now in Canada, we have thousands of blood sampling are going in US, and I think in a couple of years it's going to stop, because they want to create their own, labs and the genomic platforms in Canada to keep the data in Canada. The people are more and more afraid about the data and the exchange of data. And I think we have the same concerns also with the apps and the genomic data for clinical part of the follow-up.
Hey, Archana, how about we jumped into, because we have a couple of more topics. One would be payments, and the other would be, and wrap it up with ethics. So let's talk about payments, how this is getting paid for over with Jean, private practice, not getting paid for out of pocket. But it sounds like in our conversations earlier, Jean, you're also a lot easier to access than in Canada, sort of the public offerings there, but you are, for at least in Canada, this is paying out of pocket.
In Canada, we have a great health system with many things, paid and reimbursed by the public health. But even for fertility, needs, there is a reimbursement also for one cycle for per couple for FVF and this kind of needs of the couple. But I think the capabilities of the public system are limited. So even if there is a kind of reimbursement and public offer, people and patients need more availability of specialists and follow up and evaluation of the patient. So many times people prefer to pay to have the service right now with all the needs, all the advices, and not going to the public system because it's too long, it's too complicated. It's you have to have appointments in different places, and so I think the idea to get a service in one place. With all the specialists in the same place, with a package globally, efficient, will be always a good solution. For example, in Quebec province, in Quebec City, we do 35% of the follow-ups of the pregnancies, and normally the follow-up of the pregnancy is for free in the public system. In the Montreal area, we do 10% of the follow-up of the pregnancies, but the follow-up of the pregnancy is for free for patients normally in the public system. So there is a need of more efficient, services, and people choose very often to pay to get these services. And as I said before, also many assurance companies now pay for these services. We do ultrasonographies; they are paying very easily for the ultrasonographies. All the blood testing for the routine follow-ups are paid for by the assurances. And also right now the genetic screenings very often, I think nearly 60 to 80% of assurances companies are paying for that for their patients. So we see a sign of more easy way to get the services for these patients. But of course, for patients who cannot afford for these services, we have to find a solution, and we have to create a foundation. We have to create something to help also other patients.
Archana, payments is your sort of area, so I'm going to hand this off to you.
Yeah. I mean, it is, when you look at commercial health plan, especially in the US, it is very much driven by the clients, which is the employer, and that is sponsoring the plan. And so they get almost, and this is not specific to United Healthcare, but they do get a menu of items, right? What kind of coverage you would like? So how far you want to go? Is that a basic plan that includes workup, treatment, up to IUI, which is an intrauterine insemination, which is a process that you prime the ovaries, and then you put the sperm in the right place so the pregnancy happens. That is kind of the basic plan generally for most all health plans. And the second is more kind of advanced or enhanced plan in which the inclusion of IVF and then how many cycles would be included. And then there's the whole premium plan in which there is workup, IUI, IVF, ICSI, which is a little bit kind of advanced IVF, you could call it that way. And then also a cryopreservation would be included. So it's very much driven by the employer. And most of the employers, having worked in that space for more than about 12 years, that alongside self-insured employers, most of the employers customize to their demographics. So if you get this young company like Meta or Google is not young anymore. I mean, they are kind of middle age now. But when you start seeing those younger companies, Salesforce and others, they start to put a more premium plan in which they have all three layers of therapeutic intervention, and it's very intervention driven. So it's a office-based intervention, then there's embryologist-based intervention like IVF and ICSI, and then there is a cryopreservation that requires a cryopreservation facility that they are able to cut good deals with. When they are thinking about that as being covered as part of health plan, they look at like most of the health plans have a decent network, but what we were just talking about, the availability. Dr. Tendai was talking about like how many handful of fertility specialists we have in the country. Then the employer starts to think my member, my patient, my employee will be standing in line for 2 years before they get to see Dr. Milky at Stanford, for example. And so how do we then fast track that? So then they look at solutions like Kindbody, which is the enhanced network. So they go out, and the Kindbody has their own roster of providers that they have and centers, and where they have hired maybe one IVF person covers 5 different branches, and then they kind of rotate around doing the IVF procedures. So that's how they have enhanced the basic, the enhanced and the premium offering alongside the point solution that wraps around. Most of the point solutions, I would say, come with information base, which is pretty rich for women, so that they're not only educated around optimizing their fertility, but they also are informed around what to expect through the IVF cycle, or what to expect through an IUI cycle. So they don't come blind to it. And then they also have a very tight EAP connection, which is their behavioral health referral track. So anybody who gets an IVF done, they have very, very rich behavioral health support. And that is something that I've seen most all of this. So I would say that that's kind of what we are seeing in the health plan and commercial employer space.
I want to bring Tammy in here quickly because she works with a lot of underserved women that are probably not working at Facebook and Apple and Google. They need these services as well. I think that Jean also brought that up in terms of these women. And Tammy, how are they paying for your services? Are
Yes.
you? Yeah.
Yes, I'm on. Okay.
Yep, you're on.
Okay, great. So in the underserved clinics, these are most of my patients are already pregnant. So it's prenatal care, but I do occasionally get some women who are looking for fertility answers. I had a lady today, Samoan descent. She had a BMI of 54. She's 46 and she wants to get pregnant. So there's a lot of barriers there. And so we're limited. She's got Medi-Cal and they're not going to pay for this kind of stuff. So I'm still learning the loops, and I'm still, trying to navigate the system. There's a lot of challenges out there. There's only so far that I can get, which is as far as like optimizing her health for optimal fertility. But then connecting her with someone like, Tendai, it's just going to be almost impossible.
Well, Tendai, do you have offerings for women who can't afford it?
We do. And just to also touch on Archana's point, New York is one of the 16 IVF mandated states where companies are required to provide fertility treatments in 16 states in the US. And so we work with loan companies, we work with different other agencies as well, and also grant agencies. The state of New York actually has an IVF grant that they provide to various clinics around the state, which help with couples who are facing infertility but can't afford to pay for IVF, and they actually provide a grant for that.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. How about Jillian? I bet that Jillian's having trouble getting on. So
I'm good. I'm back in. I got kicked out, and so here, but I'm back. I don't know why.
I'm assuming a telehealth offering. I mean, obviously you're more accessible because you're a telehealth offering. But are you more affordable? Are there some affordable? What is the demographic and socioeconomic makeup of your customer base?
That's a great question. And I actually, being so new, I don't have a lot of great data on that. I know that it's pretty wide. I think the diversity of our age and socioeconomic status of our patients is, to my understanding, quite diverse, because it is a, affordable, non-insurance kind of based company. I think that whose mission and purpose is access and accessibility, right? So I think that I think that I don't have any numbers on it, but my understanding is that it's quite diverse.
Well, great. I think we're moving toward the end, and everybody, we're sort of in our last topic. We're saving the best one, maybe the most controversial one for last, which is sort of ethics. But I think we all kind of struggle with the question of ethics, particularly as we take more control of our bodies, right? And we take and sort of manipulate sort of the natural order of things. So just sort of a broad question here as we're ending this. Women are increasingly having children later. The median age at which women within the United States went from 27 in 1990 to 30 in 2019. And I guess, that's sort of the question, but the share of US adults who were married by age 21 dropped to 6% in 2021, according to Pew. This is down from 33%. So basically what I'm saying is that we moved everything. We basically postponed marriage and having children in order to have, a career. And is it too much to ask, or is it too conventional to say that maybe we should flip-flop it? So women and men could maybe sort of go through their fertile season in their 20s and then have their career in their 30s or build their life together. So anyway, some ethical questions to ask, but would love to throw it out there for you guys to respond.
I would like to start because I was recently at King's College, and I was there to we spoke about wilderness medicine because of my Army background, but it wound up turning into a totally different conversation because there was a lot of females in the crowd, and they were more curious about how I was able to have all these children and be in the Army and nursing and all these, basically career. And I really just try to encourage them because I could see that a lot of them wanted to have children, but they felt like they had to sacrifice wanting children in order to be successful with their career. And I said, well, you can do both. So instead of the A or B, Bambi, I want to present the C, which is you can have both. It's going to look different for each person, and every person's path is going to be unique, but every person's path is already unique. So the challenges are going to be there, but the reward is going to be great. So that's kind of where my standpoint is on that.
Okay. Does anybody have a comment or follow-up comment to that? Okay,
I
so
think-
as
I think, of course, we see the rise of the age and the careers coming first before to you know, to build a family. This is an evolution of our society, but perhaps it's also our fault to never, you know, put first the advantages to create a family and the happiness of a family. And because we do a lot of advertisements about you know, sports, about tourism, about personal life and freedom, but I think the values of a family, everyone consider that you know, somehow, you know, something from the past. So that's a pity somehow, because you know, when we look back to our lives, we see that the more important you know, steps and periods of the life and happiness, it's very often the family. It's not the travels we do, you know, the sports, the extreme sports we used to do. It's very often the family. So that's a pity though. So I don't know how to comment about that, but perhaps we have to promote that.
yeah, perhaps, you know, on a personal note, my brother's daughter got married at 18, and I thought, what are you doing? And of course, somebody who, you know, had a career, pursued a career, and so she's 29 now or 30. She has 5 kids, but you know, I look at her and I think, wow, you are super happy, and that's great. And she's making a home for herself and her family, and she's having a life, and she loves it. So Jean, it's true. Maybe there is a little bit, you know, on my end, less promotion of doing that in your 20s, and that maybe I need to turn that around, and society needs to turn that around as well. Does anyone else have a comment around that?
Well, I think you know, Bambi, we have talked about it, but at a population health level, right? It has to be a society that brings about change. And consistently, what happens is a woman goes to a college, or even men, they go to college, and it's a natural transition to get into a job. And then job has a natural transition of rising in career, right? And we've never really have looked at prioritizing the procreation. I would just say procreation on both men and women's side as an important function of humanity in a way. We have always prioritized, especially in all throughout the world, if you see, we have prioritized the earning over you know, procreation. And the cycles that we are tied into, like the education cycle or academic cycle, naturally leads to a professional cycle that naturally leads to then an afterthought of a family. And so I think we need to fundamentally start to shift. Every job that I have taken on or transitioned in, they've asked the question about longevity around that prior job. How long were you in the prior job? How many years or others? And if there is a gap, I don't have a gap, but like if somebody has a gap, they double click on it. And it's like, come on now, a woman having a gap, it's none of anybody's business, or even men having a gap as a father. It's none of anybody's business to ask, so long as they're professionally trained and skilled and ready to go and work. That is not the right question to ask. And so that's what kind of my concern is, that as a society, we don't think of it that way, that, you know, especially as a hiring society. So when I'm hiring my team member, I should not be asking about that gap that they took to take care of parents, take care of kids, or having a family. So there's a shift that needs to happen there.
Right. Yeah, I think so. And then let's go around. There's another ethical question here, and this comes with genetics and understanding. I think Tendai, you talked about this, Jean, you talked about this a little bit, but understanding what is a high quality embryo, maybe the sort of selecting the best eggs, or what do they call it? Designer babies or so. You know, but we've overcome a lot of ethical questions. Our culture has changed. So if you can both talk about sort of what are some ethical challenges we had maybe 10 years ago that we're okay with today, and what are some of the ones you're struggling with today?
Oh,
What-
of course.
Yeah.
Sorry if I start. Of course, we are not talking about modifying the genomics of the embryo. Just screening the embryos to get the the best embryo to have the best results of fertility, and also to screen also for genetic pathology, and to have an healthy baby after birth. So I think this selection we talk about, it's more a selection to get the best egg and the best embryo to use, and not based on genetics criteria about selections or modifying the genetics of the embryo. So I don't think very often I say to my patients, you are going to get pregnant in a fertility clinic. You take the same risk than a natural pregnancy. It's the same thing. So for me, there is not a big ethical problem of using these fertility techniques.
Tendai, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, so just to mention with what you said, Bambi, in terms of ethical issues, some in the fertility world, when you do IVF, there is the option to do genetic testing on the embryos. Initially, that genetic testing was to look for various disorders or abnormalities in the chromosomes. But one of the chromosomes that checked is the gender chromosome, right? And so going back 10 years ago, it was usually just checking for those abnormalities. Now, we sometimes get some women who come in wanting a specific gender. And so that's the reason why they're even coming in. They're not infertile, they're coming in specifically for fertility treatments to select a specific gender. And so that's one of the ethical issues that we deal with.
Yes, in Canada right now we have some commissions that evaluate, people need, and we of course we do not do selection based of not medical reasons for prevent a pathology or something like that.
Tendai, at this point, I assume that you're allowing them to make that selection, and you have no say. There's no policies around whether you can or cannot choose a gender.
Each clinic, and then within each clinic, each doctor has made that decision about whether they will, do IVF for somebody who's not infertile for gender selection.
Okay. Yeah, that is one of those things where you would say, okay, maybe, I'm not sure, or maybe 10 years from now, you say, well, it's, of course, it's very common that we do that already. Tough questions. That's why ethical questions aren't easy ones. So Arshana, I think we're going to wrap it up here. We've held these ladies and gents.
We have 5 minutes. Can we spend on menopause? Because I do want to talk about it. I'm super passionate about it. It's important because more of us will be in menopause than in the past generations, because women didn't last that long. And unfortunately, but I also want to talk about most of the menopause is being addressed as a symptom-based treatment. But it should be not just reactive to symptoms that the member or patient is complaining about, but being proactive in bringing them along in the new reality, a new hormonal state, which is very important because more women die of heart disease because we don't pay attention to it. We don't screen women for calcium deposits in the heart when they are arriving at in a rapid pace, much faster than men post-menopause. So the cardiovascular health becomes so much more important. So please run for the AHA race as you're running the Susan Dukomen race, right? So that's keeping in mind that the breast cancer risk is there, and it actually slows down a little in women after menopause, but the heart attack risk keeps increasing over time. as they become a little bit pre-diabetic and a little bit high cholesterol right away when menopause happens. So yes, we need to treat the symptoms of like brain fog, insomnia, dry skin, sexual dysfunction, possibly genitourinary dysfunction of like incontinence and others, more UTIs, but also looking at the other medical stuff that they're not talking about that we need to proactively bring into conversation. Cardiovascular health, bone health, brain health. Dementia is more common in menopausal women than we know of. So those are the things to kind of keep in mind, that yes, we focus on fertility, but as the women are becoming grandmas, that they are in good health so they can take care of these mothers who are on a rising track on career. So I just wanted to bring everybody in that conversation. What are you seeing? And especially I want to begin from Jillian, and I know we have 2 more minutes. So if a 30-second we could take, like, where we want to go with menopause and what are you seeing and what is your 30-second pitch towards it?
30 seconds. I actually love what you said about the not just symptom management and putting like throwing estrogen, progesterone at like the, at the hot flashes and the kind of more holistic care, because I do think one way that menopause care is skewing that I don't love is sort of this looking at estrogen, progesterone as this like catch-all that's going to like literally fix everything. You're going to be skinny, you're going to want to have sex again, you're going to have no hot flashes, and your heart is healthy, and that's not the case, right? And so there's a major case for symptom management for sure. Women are suffering and they need it, but I think that making it a more holistic conversation about what other things that you can do to keep yourself healthy and keep your mental wellness in this time of transition. So I totally agree with you there, that is such an important component of it.
That's awesome. Thank you. Tendai?
Yes, I completely agree with Jillian. And just to jump off her point as well, she mentioned previously that WISP is looking into doing early testing for fertility. There is also some organizations and companies looking at early testing for menopause as well. And just checking the hormones and getting the information and knowing and being validated that the symptoms and signs that you're experiencing are actually perimenopause or menopause. So I think that's very important. And then also what Jillian said about having holistic management and not just throwing hormones at somebody to treat their symptoms, but having an actual holistic way of managing everything.
Absolutely. Thank you. Tammy? I'm just going by the tiles that are on myself. Yeah. Tammy, your perspective, 30-second perspective on menopause and what you're seeing in your investment space also.
Yeah, so in the primary care setting, definitely seeing, I think the important thing is really to listen to the woman and how she's experiencing those symptoms, because a lot of times it's brushed aside as all in her mind. So just having some validation in what she's experiencing, whether it's mood changes, hot flashes, etc., can make a significant difference in how you manage not just the symptoms, but the root causes of why she's feeling that way.
And on the investment side, are you seeing anything on menopause?
Yes, but not as much as prenatal and fertility.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. And Jean?
Well, I do not have any comments. There is too many specialists about menopause but what I see, just a comment, it's the difference of, of living menopause between 2 women on the same age. It's completely different. So it's quite a complex problem to solve, I think. But
yeah, I was just wondering. You can tie back on to late fertility too, in a way.
Yeah,
yes.
Something that's more services for you to offer. But in 2021 Forbes article, it said 73% of women reported that they actually don't treat their menopause. So I'm curious as to what happens if you don't treat it?
Well, there are many things that happen, right? So of course there's symptoms and declining cognitive function. And it is executive functioning that happens very remarkably, and especially more so in women who are high up in the career, because they were able to do a lot more executive functioning that they can. So we have seen on productivity, huge decline. The other part that happens is they believe they're not educated on cardiovascular risk, and we are seeing rising cardiovascular risk. And just in men, everything is linear. So using cholesterol medication lowers their heart attack rate. In women, just using the cholesterol medication is not going to cut it. You almost need the hormone supplements or some level of lifestyle intervention that optimizes your women hormone, because they still exist even after menopause, that you can manage your cardiovascular risk. So a lot more needs to happen, and women are less educated. Just like they had that 5-year lag, we have a 5-year lag before we start intervening, and that is actually a sweet window where we need to intervene, is that 5-year, for having cardiovascular benefits and bone benefits and everything else.
Great way to end, Archana, on menopause.
Well,
not all women are going to, more women will
full
be
cycle
than they will, but yes, it is the full cycle for sure. But the good news is that we're all creating awareness, at least particularly those on the panel here are definitely in touch and communicating with women, with your patients. So it's great that you have a passion for women's health, because there's a lot going on. So
and remember that only a subset of women will need fertility treatment. 100% of women will need menopausal help.
And that's true too. All right. Well, let's wrap it up there. I want to thank everyone from across the country, around the world. Jean over in Quebec City, Tendai in Brooklyn, Jillian in Texas en route to Miami, Tammy in California, Archana in California, and myself as well in California. So thank you everyone for joining us. We're going to wrap it up there. To our audience, you've been listening to The Future of Fertility and Menopause. I'm Bambi Francisco Roizen, and my partner is Dr. Archana Dubé. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.